The Big Wave, Part 2. When they went back into the cave, it was bright again, but however good a time they had on the island, Jah looked often at the sea. Now he ran onto the beach and saw it sinking towards the west, and he called to Kino, "Come quickly, we must swim home." Into the ocean, ruddy with sunset, they plunged together. The water was warm and soft and held them up, and they swam side by side across the broad channel. On the shore, Jah's father was waiting for them. They saw him standing, his hands shading his eyes, against the bright sky, looking for them. When their two black heads bobbed out of the water, he shouted to them and waved out to meet them. He gave a hand to each of them, pulling them out of the white surf. "You've never been so late before, Jah," he said anxiously. "We were in the cave, Father. Don't worry," Jah said. But Jah's father held him by his shoulders. "Do not be so late," he said, and Kino, wondering, looked at him and saw that even the strong fisherman was afraid of the anger of the sea. He bade them good night and climbed the hill to his home, and found his mother readying the supper on the table. The food smelled delicious, hot, fragrant rice, chicken soup, brown fish. No one was worried about Kino. His father was washing himself, pouring water over his face and head with a dipper, and his little sister, Setsu, was fetching the chopsticks. In a few minutes they were all sitting around the clean mat around a low square table, and his parents were filling the children's bowls. Nobody spoke, for it is not polite to speak until the food is served and everybody has had something to eat. But when the supper was over, and Kino's father was drinking a little hot wine out of a very small cup, and his mother was gathering together the black lacquered wood rice bowls, Kino turned to his father. "Father, why is Jah afraid of the ocean?" he asked. "The ocean is very big. No one knows its beginning or its end." Jah's father is nervous too. Afraid. Kino sighed. "We do not understand the ocean," his father said. "I am glad we live on the land," Kino went on. "There's nothing to be afraid of on the farm. But one can be afraid of the land too," his father replied. "Do you remember the great volcano we visited last autumn?" Kino did remember. Each autumn, after the harvest was in, the family took a holiday. They always walked, and even little Setsu. They carried packs of food and bedding on their backs, and in their hands tall staffs to help them up the mountainsides. And then, forgetting all their daily tasks, they walked to some famous sight. At home, a kind neighbor tended to the chickens and looked after the place. Last autumn, they had gone to visit a great volcano 20 miles away. Kino had never seen it before, but he had heard of it often, and sometimes on a very clear day, far to the edge of the sky, if he climbed the hill behind the farm, he could see a gray, fan-like cloud. It was the smoke from the volcano, his father had told him. Sometimes the earth trembled a bit, even under the farm. That was the volcano too. Yes, he could remember the great yawning mouth of the volcano. He had looked down into it, and he had not liked it. Great curls of yellow and black smoke were rolling about in it, and a white stream of melted rock was crawling slowly from one corner. He had wanted to go away, and even at night, sometimes when he was warm in his soft cotton quilt in his bed on the matting floor, he was glad the volcano was so very far away, and there was at least 3 mountains between. Now he looked at his father across the low table. "Must we always be afraid of something?" he asked. His father looked back at him. He was a strong, wiry, thin man, and muscles on his arms and legs were cored with hard work. His hands were rough, but he kept them clean, and always went barefoot except for straw sandals. When he came into the house, he took even these off. No one wore shoes in the house. That was how they kept the floors clean. We must learn to live with danger, he now said to Kino. Do you mean the ocean and the volcano can't hurt us if we are not afraid? Kino asked. No, his father replied. I did not say that. Ocean is there and volcano is there. It is true that any day ocean may rise into storm and volcano may burst into flame. We must accept that fact, but without fear. We must say, someday I shall die. And does it matter whether by ocean or volcano, or whether I grow old and weak? I don't want to think about such things, Kino said. It is right for you not to want to think about them, his father said. Then do not be afraid. When you are afraid, you are thinking about them all the time. Enjoy life and do not fear death. That is the way of a good Japanese. There is much in life to enjoy. Kino had a good time every day. In the winter, he went to a school in the fishing village, and he and Jia shared a seat. They studied reading and arithmetic and all the things that other children learned in the school. But in the summer, Kino had to work hard on the farm, for his father needed help. Even Setsu and his mother helped when the rice seedlings had to be planted into flooded fields on the terrace. And they helped too when the grain was ripe and had to be cut into sheaves and threshed. On those days, Kino could not run down to the mountainside to find Jia. When the day was over, he was so tired he fell asleep over his supper. But there were days where Jia was too busy to play. Word came in from the fishermen up the coast that a school of fish was passing through the channel, and then every fishing boat made haste to sail out to the bay and inlets in the main currents. Early in the morning, sometimes so early that the light was still in that of the setting moon, Jia and his father sailed the boat out and across the silvery sea to let down their nets at dawn. If they were lucky, the nets came up so heavy with fish that it took all their strength to haul them up, and soon the bottom of the boat was flashed with sparkling and wriggling fish. Sometimes, if it was not seed time or harvest, Kitty went with Jia and his father. Exciting thing, to get up in the night and dress himself in the warm padded jacket tied across his waist. Even in summer, the wind was cool over the sea and dawn. However early he got up, his mother always got up too, and gave him a bowl of hot rice soup, and some bean curd, and hot tea before he started. Then she packed his lunch in a clean little wooden box, cold rice and fish and a little bit of radish pickle. Down the stone steps of the mountain path, Kino ran straight to the narrow dock, where the fishing boats bobbed up and down in the tide. Jia and his father were already there, and in a few minutes the boat was nosing in its way between the rocks out to open sea. Sails set and filling with wind, they sped straight into the dawn-lit sky. Kino crouched down on the floor behind the bow and felt his heart rise with joy and excitement. The shore fell far behind them, and the boats took on a deep swell of the ocean. Soon they came to a whole fleet of fishing boats, and then together they flew after the schools of fish. It was like being a bird in a flock, flying into the sky. How exciting it was, too, to pull up the fish. At such times, Kino felt Jia was more lucky than he. Fish harvest was much easier than rice harvest. I wish my father was a fisherman, he would tell Jia. It is stupid to plow and plant and cut sheaves when I could just come out like this and reap fish from the sea. Jia shook his head. But when the storms come, you wish yourself back upon the earth, he said. Then he laughed. How would fish taste without rice? Think of only eating fish. We need both farmers and fishermen, Jia's father said. On days when the sky was bright and the winds mild, the ocean lay so calm and blue that it was hard to believe it could be cruel and angry. Yet even Kinno never quite forgot that under the warm blue surface, the water was cold and green. When the sun shone, the deep water was still. But when the deep water moved and heaved and stirred, then Kinno was glad that his father was a farmer and not a fisherman. And yet, one day, it was the earth that brought the ocean, the big wave. Deep under the deepest part of the ocean, miles under the still green waters, fires raged in the heart of the earth. The icy cold of the water could not chill those fires. Rocks were melted, boiled under the crust of the ocean's bed, under the weight of the water. But they could not break through. At last the steam grew so strong that it forced its way through to the mouth of the volcano. That day, as he helped his father plant turnips, Kinno saw the sky overcast halfway to the zenith. "Look, father!" he cried. "The volcano is burning again!" His father stopped and gazed anxiously at the sky. "It looks very angry," he said. "I shall not sleep tonight." All night while the others slept, Kinno's father kept watch. When it was dark and darker and darker, the sky was lit with red, and the earth trembled under the farmhouses. Down at the fishing villages, lights in the little houses showed the other farmers watched too. For generations, fathers had watched earth and sea. Morning came, a strange, fiery dawn. The sky was red and gray. And even here, upon the farms, cinders and ash fell from the volcano. Kinno had a strange feeling when he stepped barefoot upon the earth, that it was hot under his feet. In the house, the mother had taken down everything from the walls that could fall or be broken, and her few good dishes she had packed under straw in a basket and set outside. "Shall we have an earthquake, father?" Kinno asked as they ate breakfast. "I cannot tell, my son," my father replied. "Earth and sea are struggling together against the fires inside the earth. No fishing boats set sail that hot summer morning. There was no wind. The sea lay dead and calm, as though oil had been poured upon the waters. It was a purple gray, smooth and beautiful, but when Kinno looked at it, he felt afraid. "Why is the sea such a color?" he asked. "Sea mirrors sky. Sea and earth and sky, if they work together against man, it will be very dangerous for us indeed." "Where are the gods at such time?" Kinno asked. "Will they not be mindful of us?" "There are times when the gods leave man to take care of himself. They test us to see how able we are to save ourselves." "And if we are not able?" Kinno asked. "We must be able," his father replied. "Fear alone makes man weak. If you are afraid, your hands tremble and your feet falter, and your brain cannot tell hands and feet what to do." No one stirred from home that day. Kinno's father sat at the door, watching the sky and the oily sea, and Kinno stayed near him. He did not know what Ja was doing, but he imagined that Ja, too, stayed by his father. So the hours passed until noon. At noon, his father pointed down the mountainside. "Look at old gentleman's castle," he said. Halfway down the mountainside, on the knoll where the castle stood, he saw that a red flag rose slowly to the top of the tall pole and hang limp against the sky. Old gentleman is telling everyone to be ready, Kino's father went on. Twice I have seen that flag go up, both times before you were born. Be ready for what? Kino asked in a frightened voice. For whatever happens, Kino's father replied. At 2:00, the sky began to grow black. The air was as hot as though a forest fire was burning, but there was no sign of such fire. The glow of the volcano glared down the mountainside, blood red against the black. A deep-toned bell tolled across over the hills. What is that bell? Kino asked his father. I've never heard it before. They rang twice before you were born, his father replied. It is the bell in the temple inside the walls of the old gentleman's castle. He is calling the people to come up from the village and shelter within the walls. Will they come? Kino asked. Not all of them, his father replied. Parents will try to make their children go, but the children will not want to leave their parents. Mothers will not want to leave fathers, and fathers will stay by their boats. But some will want to be sure of their lives. The bell kept on ringing urgently, and soon, out of the village, a trickling stream of people, nearly all of them children, began to climb toward the knoll. I wish Joe would come, Kino said. Do you think he'll see me if I stand on the edge of the terrace and wave my white girdle cloth? Try it, his father said. Come with me, Kino begged. So Kino and his father stood on the edge of the white terrace and waved. Kino took off the strip of white cloth from around his waist that he wore instead of a belt, and he waved it, holding it in both hands high above his head. Far down the hill, Jas saw that two figures were waving a strip of white against the dark sky. He was crying as he climbed, and trying not to cry. He had not wanted to leave his father, but because he was the youngest one, his older brother and his father and mother all told him that he must go up the mountain. We must divide ourselves, Jas' father said. If the ocean yields to the fires, you must live after us. Live alone? Jas said. It is your duty to obey me as a good Japanese son, his father told him. Ja had run out of the house, crying. Now, when he saw Kino, he decided that he would go there instead of the castle, and he began to hurry up the hill to the farm. Next to his own family, he loved Kino's strong father and kind mother. He had no sister of his own, and he thought Setsu was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. Kino's father put out his hand to help Jess up the stone wall, and Kino was just about to shout out the welcome, when suddenly a hurricane wind broke out of the ocean. Kino and Jar clung together and wrapped their arms around their father's waist. Look! Look! What is that? Kino screamed. The purple rim of the ocean seemed to lift and rise against the clouds. A silver-green band of bright sky appeared like a low dawn above the sea. May the gods save us, Kino heard his father muttering. The castle bell began to toll again, deep and pleading. But would people hear it in the roaring wind? Their homes had no windows towards the sea. Did they know what was about to happen? Under the deep waters of the ocean, miles down, under the cold, the earth had yielded at last to the fire. It groaned and split open, and the cold water fell onto the middle of the boiling rocks. Steam burst out and lifted the ocean high into the sky, and a big wave It rushed towards the shore, green and solid, frothing into white at its edges. It rose higher and higher and higher, lifting up hands and claws. "I must tell Father!" Jas screamed, but Kino's father held him fast with both hands. "It is too late," he said sternly. He would not let Jas go. In a few seconds, before their eyes, the wave had grown and come nearer and nearer and higher and higher. The air was filled with its roar and shout. It rushed over the flat, still waters of the ocean, and before Jack could scream again, it reached the village and covered its fathoms deep and swirling wild water. Green laced its fierce white foam. The wave ran up the mountainside into the knoll where the castle stood up, where was an inlet. All who were still climbing the path were swept away, black, tossing scraps in the wicked water. The wave ran up the mountain until Kino and Jas saw the wavelets curl at the terrace walls upon which they stood, and then with a great sucking sigh, the wave swept back again, ebbing into the ocean, dragging everything with it, trees and stones and houses. They stood, the man and the two boys, utterly silent, clinging to each other, facing the wave as it went away. It swept back over the village and returned slowly again to the ocean, subsiding, sinking into the great stillness. Upon the beach where the village stood, not a house remained, no wreckage of wood or fallen stone wall, no little street of shops, no docks, not a single boat. The beach was as clean of houses as if no human beings had ever lived there. All that had been there was now no more. Jas gave a wild cry, and Kino felt him slip to the ground. He was unconscious. What he had seen was too much for him. What he knew he could not bear. His family and his home was gone. Kino began to cry, and Kino's father did not stop him. He stooped and gathered Jas into his arm and carried him into the house. And Kino's mother ran out of the kitchen and put down a mattress, and Kino's father laid Jas upon it. "It is better that he is unconscious," he said gently. "Let him remain so until his own will wake him. I will sit by him. I will rub his hands and feet," Kino's mother said sadly. Kino could say nothing. He was still crying, and his father let him cry for a while. Then he said to his wife, "Heat a little rice soup for Kino and put some ginger in it. He feels cold." And now Kino did not know until his father spoke that he did feel cold. He was shivering, and he could not stop crying. Setsu came in. She had not seen the big wave, for her mother had closed the windows and drawn the curtain against the sea. But now she saw Jas laying white pale and still. "Is Jas dead?" she asked. "No, Jas is living," his father replied. "Why doesn't he open his eyes?" she asked again. "Soon he will open his eyes," the father replied. "If Jas is not dead, then why does Kino cry?" Setsu asked. You are asking too many questions," her father replied. "Go back to the kitchen and help your mother." So Setsu went back again, sucking her forefinger and staring at Jas and Kino as she went. And soon the mother came in with a hot rice soup, and Kino drank it. He felt warm now, and he could stop crying, but he was still frightened and sad. "We say to Jas when he wakes?" he asked his father. "We will not talk," his father replied. We will give him warm food and let him rest. We will help him to feel he still has a home. Here? Kino asked. Yes, his father replied. I have always wanted another son, and Jia will be that son. As soon as he knows that this is his home, then we must help him to understand what has happened. So, they waited for Jia to wake. I don't think Jia can ever be happy again, Kino said sorrowfully. Yes, he will be happy someday, his father said, for life is always stronger than death. Jia will feel when he wakes that he can never be happy again. He will cry, and we must let him cry. But he cannot cry all the time. But he cannot always cry. After a few days, he will stop crying all the time. He will only cry part of the time. He will sit sad and quiet. We must allow him to be sad, and we must not make him speak. But we will do our work and live as always we do. Then one day he will be hungry and will eat something that our mother cooks, something special, and he will begin to feel better. He will not cry any more in the daytime, but only at night. We must let him cry at night. But all the time, his body will be renewing itself, his blood flowing in his veins, his growing bones, his mind beginning to think again will make him live. He cannot forget his father and mother and his brother, Kino explained. He cannot, and he should not forget him, Kino's father said. Just as he lived with them alive, he will live with them dead. Someday he will accept their death as part of his life. He will weep no more. He will carry them in his memory and in his thoughts. His flesh and blood are part of them. So long as he is alive, they too will live in him. The big wave came, but as it went away, the sun shines again, birds sing, and earth flowers. Look out over the sea now. Kino looked out into the open door, and he saw the ocean, sparkling and smooth. The sky was blue again. A few clouds on the horizon were the only sign of what had passed, except for the empty beach. How cruel it seems for the sky to be so clear and the ocean so calm, Kino said, but his father shook his head. No, it is wonderful that after the storm the ocean grows calm and the sky is blue once more. It was not the ocean or the sky that made the evil storm. Who made it? Kino asked. He let tears roll down his cheeks because there was so much he could not understand. But only his father saw them, and his father understood. Ah, no one knows who makes evil storms, his father replied. We only know that they come. When they come, we must live through them as bravely as we can, and after they are gone, we must feel again how wonderful is life. Every day of life is more valuable now than it was before the storm. But Jia's family, his father, his mother, and brother, and all the good fisher folk who were lost, Kino whispered. He could not forget the dead. Now we must think of Jia, his father reminded him. He will open his eyes at any minute, and we must be there. You to be his brother, and I to be his father. Call your mother too, and little Setsu. Now they heard something. Jia's eyes were still closed, but he was sobbing in his sleep. Kino ran to fetch his mother and Setsu as they gathered about his bed, kneeling on the floor so as to be near Jia when he opened his eyes. In a few minutes, while they all watched, Jia's eyelids fluttered on his pale cheeks, and then he opened his eyes. He did not know where he was. He looked from one face to the other, as though they were strangers. Then he looked up into the beams of the ceiling and around the white walls of the room. He looked at the blue flowered quilt that covered him. None of them said anything. They continued to kneel about him, waiting, but Setsu could not keep quiet. She clapped her hands and laughed. "Oh, Ja has come back," she cried. "Ja, did you have a good dream?" The sound of her voice made him fully awake. "My father, my mother," he whispered. Kina's mother took his hand. "I will be your mother now, dear Ja," she said. "I will be your father. I am your brother now, Ja," Kina faltered. "Oh, Ja will live with us now," Setsu said joyfully. Then Ja understood. He got up from his bed and walked to the door that stood open to the sea and the sky. He looked down the hillside to the beach, where all that remained of the 20 or more houses were a few foundation posts and some big stones. The gentle little waves of the ocean were playfully carrying the little timber that made the houses and throwing it onto the sands and snatching it back away. Family had followed Ja, and now they stood around him. Kinu did not know what to say, for his heart ached for his friend brother. Kinu's mother was wiping her eyes, and even little Setsu looked sad. She took Ja's hand and stroked it. "Ja, I will give you my pet duck," she said. But Ja could not speak. He kept on looking at the ocean. "Ja, your rice broth is growing cold," Kinu's father said. "We ought all to eat something," Kinu's mother said. "I have a fine chicken for dinner." "I'm hungry," Setsu cried. "Come on, my son," Kinu's father said to Ja. They persuaded him gently, gathering around him, and they entered the house again. In this pleasant, cozy room, they all sat down around about the table. Ja sat with the others. He was awake, and he could hear the voices of Kinu's family, and he knew that Kinu sat beside him. But inside he felt still very asleep. He was very tired, so tired that he did not want to speak. He knew that he would never see his father and mother anymore, or his brother, or the neighbors and friends of the village. He tried not to think about that, or to imagine their quiet bodies floating under the swelling waves. "Eat, Ja, eat." "The chicken is good," Kinu whispered. Ja's bowl was before him, untouched. He was not hungry, but when Kinu begged him, he took up the little porcelain spoon and drank a little of the soup. It was hot and good, and it smelled its fragrance in his nostrils. He drank more, and then he took up his chopsticks and ate some of the meat and rice. His mind was still unable to think, but his body was young and strong and glad of the food. When they had all finished, Kinu said, "Shall we go up the hillside, Ja?" But Ja shook his head. "I want to go to sleep again," he said. Kinu's father understood. "Sleep is good for you," he said, and he led Ja to his bed. And when Ja had laid himself down, he covered him with the quilt and shut the sliding panels. "Ja is not ready yet to live," he told Kinu. "We must wait." The body began to heal first, and Kinu's father, watching Ja tenderly, knew that the body would heal the mind and the soul. "Life is stronger than death," he told Kinu again and again. But each day Ja was still tired. He did not want to think or to remember. He only wanted to sleep. He woke to eat and then to sleep. And when Kinu's mother saw this, she led him to the bedroom, and Kinu sank each time into the soft mattress spread on the floor and the quiet, clean room. He fell asleep almost at once, and Kinu's mother covered him and went away. All through these days, Kinu did not feel like playing. He worked hard beside his father in the fields. They did not talk much, and neither of them wanted to look at the sea. It was enough to look at the earth, dark and rich beneath their feet. One evening, Kino climbed the hill behind the farm and looked towards the volcano. The heavy cloud of smoke had long gone away, and the sky was always clear now. He felt happier to know that the volcano was no longer angry, and he went down again to the house. On the threshold, his father was smoking his usual evening pipe. In the house, his mother was giving Setsu her evening bath. "Is Ja asleep already?" Kino asked his father. "Yes, and it is a good thing for him," his father replied. "Sleep will strengthen him, and when he wakes he will be able to think and remember." "But should he remember such sorrow?" "Yes," his father replied. "Only when he dares to remember his parents will he be happy again." They sat together, father and son, and Kino asked another question. "Father, are we not very unfortunate people to live in Japan?" "Why do you think so?" his father asked in reply. "Because the volcano is behind our house and the ocean is in front, and when they work together for evil to make the earthquake and the big wave, then we are helpless. Always many of us are lost. To live in the midst of danger is to know how good life is," his father replied. "But if we are lost in the danger?" Kino asked anxiously. "To live in the presence of death makes us brave and strong," Kino's father replied. "That is why our people never fear death. We see it too often, and we do not fear it. To die a little later or a little sooner does not matter, but to live bravely, to love life, and see how beautiful the trees are, and the mountain, yes, and even the sea. To enjoy work because it produces food for life. In these things we Japanese are a fortunate people. We love life because we live in danger. We do not fear death because we understand that life and death are necessary to each other." "What is death?" Kino asked. "Death is a great gateway," his father said. His face was not at all sad. Instead, it was a quiet, happy. "The gateway where?" Kino asked again. Kino's father smiled. "Can you remember when you were born?" Kino shook his head. "I was too small." Kino's father laughed. "I remember very well. Oh, how hard you thought it was to be born. You cried and you screamed. Didn't I want to be born?" Kino asked. This was very interesting to him. "You did not," his father told him, smiling. "You wanted to stay just where you were, in the warm, dark house of the unborn. But the time came to be born, and the gate of life opened." "Did I know it was the gate of life?" Kino asked. "You did not know anything about it, and so you were not afraid of it. But see how foolish you were. Here, we were waiting for you, your parents, already loving you and eager to welcome you. And you have been very happy, haven't you?" "Until the big wave came," Kino replied. "Now I am afraid again because of the death the big wave brought." "You are only afraid because you don't know anything about death," his father replied. "But some day you will wonder why you are afraid, even as today you will wonder why you feared to be born." While they were talking, the dusk had deepened, and now coming up the mountainside, they saw flickering light. The fireflies had come out, but the light was steadily climbing the pathway towards the house. "I wonder who comes," Kino exclaimed. "A visitor," his father replied. "But who can it be?" In a few minutes they saw the visitor. It was the old gentleman coming up from the castle. His manservant carried the lantern. The old gentleman walked behind him very sturdily, with the help of a long staff. They heard old gentleman's voice in the dusk. "Is this the house of Uchima, the farmer? Old gentleman asked. It is, his servant replied, and the farmer sits there at the door with his son. At this, Kino's father stood up, and so did Kino. Please, honored sir, Kino's father said, what can I do for you? Old gentleman came forward. Do you have a lad here by the name of Ja? He lies sleeping inside my house, Kino's father said. I wish to see him. Old gentleman said. Anyone could see that the old gentleman was one expected to be obeyed, but Kino's father only smiled. Sir, the lad is asleep and I cannot wake him. He suffered the loss of his whole family when the big wave came. Now sleep heals him. I will not wake him, old gentleman said. I only want to see him. So Kino's father led old gentleman tiptoe into the room where Ja slept, and Kino went too. The servant held the light shaded by his hand so it would not fall on Ja's closed eyes. Old gentleman looked down on the sleeping boy. Ja was very beautiful, even though he was pale and weary. He was tall for his age, and body was strong, and his face showed intelligence as well as beauty. Old gentleman gazed at him and then mentioned motioned to the servant to lead him away. They went again to the dooryard, and there old gentleman turned to Kino's father. It is my habit when the big wave comes to care for those who are orphaned. 3 times has the wave come, and 3 times I have searched out the orphans and the windows, and I have fed them and sheltered them. But I have heard of this boy Ja, and I wish to do more for him. If he is as good as he is handsome, I will make him my own son. But Ja is ours, Kino cried. Hush, his father cried. We are only poor people. If old gentleman wants Ja, we cannot say we will not give him up. Exactly, old gentleman said. I will educate him and give him fine clothes and send him to a good school, and he may become a great man and an honor to the whole province and even to the nation. But if he lives in the castle, we can't play any more. We must think of Ja's good, Kino's father said. Then he turned to old gentleman. Sir, it is very kind of you to propose this for Ja. I have planned to take him for my own son, now that he has lost his birth parents, but I am only a poor farmer, and I cannot pretend that my house is as good as yours, or that I can afford to send Ja to a fine school. Tomorrow when he wakes, I will tell him of your kind offer, and he will decide. Very well, old gentleman said, but let him come and tell me himself, so that I know how he feels. Certainly, Kino's father replied proudly. Ja will speak for himself. How unhappy Kino now was to think that Ja might leave this house and go and live in the castle. If Ja goes away, I shan't have a brother, he told his father. You must not be so selfish now, Kino, his father replied. You must allow Ja to make his own choice. It would be wrong to persuade him, Kino. I forbid you to speak to Ja of this matter. When he wakes, I shall speak to him myself. When his father was so stern, Kino did not dare to disobey, and he went sadly to bed. He thought when he drew the quilt over him that he would not sleep all night, but being young and tired, he slept almost at once.